Dr. Sethia, you're an important leader in nonviolence study. You created the Ahimsa Center at Yale University 20 years ago, created a minor, and also hosted Teachers Institute for K-12 teachers for many years. But first, could you talk about the significance of Ahimsa in your own personal journey? What have been the influential people, events, or studies that have led you to this path?
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Ahimsa has been part of me ever since I was growing up. Not the way that I now know what Ahimsa is, but in the sense of its ethics. The ethics of Ahimsa were taught to us as we were all growing up, learning about not hurting anyone's feelings, that anger is not the thing to sustain, but must be conquered with friendship. And that if we ended up saying anything untoward to anyone, that we learned how to seek forgiveness and to forgive. So in that sense, it's part of our upbringing, um, but not as part of formal education, so to say. I don't think that I was taught about, ahimsa in school, although I did go to a convent school where I did learn moral science. So certain ethics were part of it, but they all came from a specific religious tradition. Um, but then later on, as I went to college, I began to get more interested in history, and I learned about how much violence there is in history. And so, what the question that continued to kind of, in one sense, I guess, um, inspired me to learn more about why and how these violence were perpetuated in historical periods throughout, from antiquity to the modern times. But at the same time, also prodded me to ask the question, um, what were the other sort of narratives in history which we don't see in common? And I think those questions always remained in the background. But as I began to teach here in the United States, after doing my dissertation on the colonial impact on India, the economic and social impact of colonialism in India, which is where I encountered the worst kind of violence that human beings could um, impose on other human beings. And that really was a major kind of a stimulus or motivation or incentive to think about, well, how were people responding to such violence? And in the process, I began to get more and more interested in learning about Gandhi. I was aware of Gandhi. I had come across Gandhi reading the modern Indian history and the role that he had played in India's movement, but I'd never read Gandhi in terms of who he was about or what he was writing, where his thoughts came from, why he got interested. All of those questions then began to really become very serious for me. And so reading Gandhi and learning about his journey to nonviolence really inspired me to make me think that why people like him are not taught the way they should be and just left as, oh, he was the father of the Indian nation. And yes, that's all the college textbooks would, include about Gandhi. So that was where I really began to understand that ahimsa is, in one sense, a personal ethic, which I had it, but that how it can become a social and political ethic, that how it can be something that can be taught and learned, not necessarily as part of any moral science or any religious tradition, but simply as a human science, if you will.
Thank you. So, related to this nonviolence as ethical and political and existential, usually the common sensual understanding of nonviolence focus on the negation of violence. But in your work, you also emphasize a lot on the positive force of nonviolence. Could you explain a little bit about why you choose to do so, and also how does such a understanding of nonviolence as a positive can help us address the critical challenges of our time?
Okay, so when one looks at ahimsa or one looks at the concept of nonviolence, they embody very positive kind of ethics, but these ethics are termed in negative terminology in both English and in Sanskrit languages. Ahimsa, that is no violence or no harm, and the same thing, non-violence, no violence. Which, of course, I began to think about these concepts, and what I came up was they are drawing our attention to the various forms of violence. That violence does not happen in one form or in one way, but it has variety of forms. And so basically, first, these concepts makes us aware of the variety of a kind of violence that there are. And then at the same time, it begs us the question, well, if nonviolence and ahimsa are not violence, what is it, right? So the definition is what it is not, but by implication, then forces us to ask the question, what ahimsa is. And when you begin to think about what ahimsa is in the positive sense, is that you cannot have ahimsa just by the absence of violence. That is not enough for it. It is incomplete. And you have to have something. So if you talk about anger as violence, then you have to find what its antidote is that allows you to overcome anger. Is it compassion? Is it friendship, amity, empathy? What is it? So that is the logical way, and the reason that there is no one word to define ahimsa has to do this with this negative terminology, because nobody can really find one single term and to encapsulate what nonviolence is. It means a lot of different things. It means empathy, it means love, it means compassion, it means forgiveness, it means trust, civility, and I can go on and on. Why? Because all of these positive attributes allow us to address violence and to reduce violence so that we could arrive at a stage where there is no violence. So this is my understanding of it. And of course, in studying Gandhi, who looked at ahimsa in both negative and in positive terms. So he added that, and there are a variety of ways in which Gandhi explains this, that nonviolence is the highest kind of love or is the highest kind of charity, and so on. So Gandhi also tries to look at it in both the absence of violence ways as well as what does it mean to have absence of violence? How can you have absence of violence? Because if you don't have compassion, if you don't have empathy, if you don't have forgiveness, you're going to be ending up in the state of violence, one way or the other. So now, how does that, your related question was, how does that help us address the problems that we face today? One of the things that I find in our society today is that, especially the Western society, the American society in which you and I now live, is that it is highly individualistic and self-centered. People are driven by the incentives of what is it in there for them. And if there is nothing for them in anything, they don't see that as an important thing to do. This is by and large. So I'm not saying there are people who that this defines the entire American culture. There are exceptions to it. But by and large, there has been, on the one hand, this highly individualistic approach that Americans have. On the other hand, I also see that we have made enormous progress in science and technology. But at the same time, we have not made much progress in the ethical and social realms. That is to say, that today there are studies which show that empathy has been declining over the last several decades. Why is it so? And when we find that people don't have a sense of empathy, something that they haven't thought about, something that they haven't learned about, something that has not been inculcated in them, something that has not been nurtured in them, it makes me wonder that if these things are really taught to our students, if these values are part of what they learn or how they learn, not only of the content. So I think the lack of empathy and the lack of care for others is another problem our society is facing today. You don't have to love everybody, but a sense of care, a sense of thinking about the other as a human being, a sense of empathy. You know, we have a lot of sympathy. People will pity on you, but that's not exactly being empathetic. So, how does one have this feeling of empathy, which actually arises from the self by thinking about the other as oneself? That is nonviolence. The feeling of oneness, you know, relating to others like you relate to yourself, is actually what is nonviolence. Third thing that I find also very kind of pervasive, I might say, in our society is to look at human beings who are multidimensional in nature and turn them into one-dimensional. So the identity of a human being, there are, for example, I may be several things. I may be a professor when I am on campus and in my classroom. I may be a wife. I may be a sister. I may be a brother. I may be a Hindu. I may be a Jain, or I may be an Asian American or a South Asian American. But if I am turned into just one dimensional, then then somebody is missing a whole lot about me, because at the very basic nature, I am a human being at a very basic level. But we don't relate to people at their very basic levels. We look at them either in their ethnic identities, in their gendered identities, in their national identities, in their religious identities, and we look at them that way, and they appear to us weird, strange, different, and we call them the other. And but if we have a sense of empathy, if we have a sense of relating to people with what ahimsa is, the spirit of oneness, the spirit of unity, the spirit of, sameness, or whatever you call, at that very basic level of being a human, then we can address a lot of problems in our society which actually occur simply because we have not learned how to relate to other people.
This is very helpful to think about going beyond one-dimensional identity and emphasize a sense of oneness. I also found no one word that actually can describe ahimsa very enlightening. You did mention that your experiences of teaching at college and look at how college textbook the substantial lack of addressing of nonviolence in college textbooks. So I want to ask you a little bit about your own experience of teaching at college level. I know that you created a minor at your university in nonviolence studies. I know that it's very difficult to create a new program. Do you have anything interesting that you want to share with us about the memorable experiences as you establish that new program?
Absolutely. So this nonviolence studies minor was one of the focus areas of the Ahimsa Center, which I founded in the year 2003, essentially because I had felt at that time that as an historian, that history is being taught by looking at change that has occurred through violence, conflict, or warfare. And there is a very rich historiography of nonviolent social change, which does not get filtered into the college textbooks. That was one of the major reasons why I thought education about nonviolence is an important thing that should happen, for which I had founded the Center for the Study of Nonviolence, which we called the Ahimsa Center. Its first major focus area was how do we create opportunities for our own students to learn about nonviolence and nonviolent change. And so the minor was created as an interdisciplinary program that brought together more than 9 departments. So we had history, political science, psychology, social work, English, literature, kinesiology, philosophy, those kinds of disciplines, and ethnic and women's studies, which were all brought into the program so that our students can learn about, have the option of learning. It was not a required thing, but it was an optional minor in nonviolence studies that students could could learn. And so in that program, I taught the core course for the program, which was Nonviolence in the Modern World. And I also taught the capstone course, which was a seminar in nonviolence studies. In addition, I also taught a course on modern India, which was also part of the minor. Um, so I think it was an exciting time on campus, and the original team of faculty members who were teaching in the minor, they were all fired up with this new kind of a thing that they could relate to within their own disciplines. And so all I remember is the enthusiasm and the excitement, both among the faculty at that time and also of our students. We tried to uh, put some of the courses in the program that would also fulfill the general education requirement to kind of encourage students to think about this minor, and to enroll in the minor, because then they could do two things at the same time: get the minor but also use that course to fulfill their general education requirement, which was kind of offered as an incentive to the students to think that this will double count for you. So the students were very happy, but I think once they began to learn about the subject matter, they began to ask questions. At least I can speak to the experiences I had teaching the core course in the minor, which was Nonviolence in the Modern World, which was a course I had created for the program itself. And they really began to ask this question: why were we not taught this in schools? Why does not talk about Martin Luther King Jr. other than his "I Have a Dream" speech, or his involvement in the civil rights movement, but nobody really talks about even Martin Luther King Jr. As a leader of a nonviolent movement. So they began to learn about some of the names that they had come across in their high school experience, that they were much more than simply the names, and that how they were pioneers within their own time period about nonviolence, for nonviolence change. And so um, there were times that people were got interested, students were excited, but there was also, I believe, to be fair to some of those students who could not understand the value of nonviolence, who questioned nonviolence, who felt nonviolence, isn't this something that belongs to religion? Isn't this something that means that you go to the temple or the church or the mosque or things like that? And so it took a lot from me to explain to them that in religious realms, nonviolence definitely is a virtue and a value and an ethic. There's no doubt about that. And it is promoted largely for your individual salvation, so that you go to heaven or you become one with God or whatever that may be. But then I explained to them, you really don't need religion to do this. Because religions, actually, if you look at it in the world today, many of our wars have been caused by frictions among religious faiths. Whether you take the Christians, or the case of crusades, or you take jihads, or you take what is currently happening between Israel and the Palestinians. This is all, related to looking at people only with that dimension of religious faith. And that causes problems. But if nonviolence is something, even if you don't have any faith, it is a set of ethics. In order for you to be loving someone, in order for you to be compassionate, in order for you to be forgiving, you really need not, subscribe to any religion. You only need to be a human being to the fullest extent possible. And if you can be a human being to the fullest extent possible, then that's what nonviolence is. An ethic, a set of ethics to relate to human beings and for your own self-evolution.
This is wonderful. You created this minor already 2021, 21 years ago. So as you think about the process, this 20 years on campus, do you feel there's any difference or change in students' receptions to nonviolence, or it's pretty much similar?
It is kind of yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
So the students who took the class and the minor and stayed with us for 2 years, they left.
Mm.
Some of them have kept in touch, and they are the ones who have been kind of influenced by it the most. And that because it touched them, they try to keep in touch with me even now. So now and then I will receive a phone call or an email or just a text message on various occasions, either telling me what they are doing with what they learned, or that how important it has been for their self-development, or how important it has been for their relationships, or whatever. But these are not all the people, all the students that I hear from. These are, I would say, perhaps 30% of the students that I would hear from. The rest, I have come to know a few others who have come to the Ahimsa Center programs from time to time, and they will show their sense of interest by engaging with the center's lectures and programs or conferences or dialogues, and they will come there. But I haven't seen any change, so to say, because the student body keeps changing. Every year we have fresh body of students. So it's very, very difficult to gauge the change. On the other hand, through our teachers programs, it has been which has had a very profound impact on the teachers, and these teachers in turn continue to have equally transformative impact on their students, and they continue to talk to me much more than the students who have graduated and gone. So if I look at what the teachers have been able to accomplish with their intensive training, I think they have made a lot more of it than it is possible for me to assess about the students.
Yes.
I probably have some anecdotal evidence to talk about the undergraduate students who have gone through this minor, but there's a lot that I can talk about the teachers who have gone through the program.
Yes.
So that is how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The last question. Not every professor has a chance to teach a class focusing on nonviolence, and I assume that you infuse the orientation of nonviolence when you teach other classes. So, do you have any thoughts or suggestions to us who like to engage in teaching nonviolence in different subjects that we address?
Yes, I do. And I myself have done that in other classes, but I see the relevance of nonviolence in a variety of fields. For example, if you are teaching in religious studies, right, where you are talking about specific religions, their, principles or practice or whatever, you could focus on how religions deal with the ethic of nonviolence. Oftentimes, even in the case of religion, they their teachings and their classes are so technical that they will focus more on rituals, ritualistic practice, how a certain kind of ritual is carried out, what are the principles, which is all fine. They have to do that what their discipline requires them to teach, but they can easily teach about how a particular religious tradition addresses nonviolence, right? For example, if you take the variety of religions, not every religion teaches nonviolence the same way or to that same extent. So you can talk about, if you are teaching comparative religion, you can deal with nonviolence in a comparative perspective, depending on how a particular religious faith addresses the issues of violence and nonviolence. That is one way. If you're teaching world history, which I have taught, which is usually a survey course, the way I structure my courses is that let's look at how change was created in modern world. And I would structure that with the trends that I will say, I see two major trends of change occurring through violence and warfare, and change occurring through nonviolence. And you can then design your course along those lines. So then you are not simply teaching about the leaders of the world or focusing on dynastic history, but you are teaching with certain themes, where on the one hand, students learn about violence and war, playing an important role in shaping history. At the same time, they learn about how nonviolence and nonviolent movements have played an important role in shaping the modern world. Another case you could probably look at in psychology, which usually deals with mental illness, right? Which always deals with mental problems of stress or whatever. How about talking about positive psychology? How about talking about positive emotions of empathy, gratitude, love, and how these positive emotions play an important role in the psychological makeup of a human being, as well as in the psychology of organizations and the psychology of the nation. So that is another way to look at. One can talk about, we have a program on our campus in food and nutrition. And what does it mean to be nonviolent in the realm of food and nutrition? Does it mean that one could, limit oneself to certain things and not eat certain things? So there has been a growing trend, for example, in plant-based diet for health reasons, but it is also has a very strong ethical reasoning, because of which plant-based diet is picking up. Not only vegetarianism, but now plant-based, which is a step further, which doesn't even include any kind of dairy, both milk and eggs, which are usually included in vegetarian diets. So one can talk about it in the context of plant-based food and nutrition. What are the ethical reasons for it, going beyond the health reasons, right? So you can bring nonviolence there in that way. I guess if you're teaching political science, one can talk about political movements of nonviolence and talk about how they shaped politics. People like Gandhi, people like Martin Luther King Jr., people like Nelson Mandela, people like Cesar Chavez, they all have so much to offer in the political domain and how they use nonviolence to transform the politics, or as Gandhi would say, to spiritualize politics, right? So there are a variety of ways in which it depends on, you have to be, I think the person teaching has to be committed to nonviolence education. If they are, they will find a way of integrating it because it is there. That's part of it. We just don't focus on that. The social movements have all been there, but we have not tapped into them to really see how they help us understand the issues and how those issues were dealt with in more nonviolent and peaceful manners.